everyone, Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. Now, I have a conversation, I think I've had this conversation with people before, but I wish to reinvigorate it. And that really is about attachment theory and how attachment theory is used within the department to ensure that children are not returned to their parents. I have for a long time questioned the validity of attachment theory, primarily because of a number of things. Firstly, it tells you that it's only a theory by its name, so clearly it is, that there are no specific clinical tests that will prove that attachment theory does what it says it is supposed to do, which is basically to identify the fact that a child has not got an attachment or an appropriate attachment, that is a disorganised attachment or some other form of attachment with their primary caregiver, or they have an attachment that is significant enough with their current caregiver that would mean that severing that attachment is going to totally destroy their lives and they're never going to be the same person again, and that it will stuff them up for future relationships, and it will be mentally unhealthy for them, and a whole host of other stuff. And I question whether or not any of those assumptions are true, because there's nothing that verifies that they are. Now, I was watching a video yesterday from the Australian Institute of Family Studies, which the presenter, who's a psychologist who specialises in this area, raised some interesting issues around attachment theory. And one of them primarily was that there is no clinical basis to suggest that there is such a thing as attachment in the first place, and that if there is a form of attachment, then there may be other reasons why a child in particular may choose to behave in certain ways. It may not have anything to do, and probably in most cases doesn't have anything to do with attachment at all. And I suppose one of the most important factors about attachment is that it is grasped and used by social workers and psychologists within the child protection system because they believe that it will justify the decisions that they make in order to remove children. Now, why you would use a theory that has no firm foundation apart from some obscure settings in which it has been implemented or tested, and one of those is the stranger situation. So the stranger situation was conducted by Mary Ainsworth, who was a student of the founder, John Bowlby. And Mary Ainsworth decided that she would set up this experiment, if you like. And the experiment was based on a stranger coming into a room and how the parent leaving the room, how the child responds. The stranger comes into the room, how a child would respond. And depending on how the child responded would determine the type of attachment that she may have had or not have with her primary caregiver. Now, a couple of things need to be noted about this. Number one, all of those experiments were done with females, so they didn't include men in that. So it's like men don't have any attachment or whatsoever to their kids because none of the experiments have verified any of that. And the second one was that it is a constructed experiment. So it wasn't like they had another set of people that they tested this against. It was just this one thing. And it was also observational. So it was really about how the observer observed this and what conclusions they came from. So in terms of clinical trials, it fails possibly at every possible level. I'm not saying that attachment theory doesn't have some value. It probably does. And John Bowlby originally wanted attachment theory to be an assessment as to the relationships that sit between parents and children. Not that it would turn out to be this diagnosis of a child's future well-being. There's prediction about where a child's going to be in years to come. That wasn't the intention at all, but it's turned out that way. I think I'd just like to say that I think it's criminal that now attachment theory is used in such a way that it determines a child's future forever, not because of the attachment theory itself, but because of the emphasis that social workers now place on it, and psychologists as well. And it's unfounded. There's no clinical proof that attachment theory is what it says it's supposed to be. After all, it is only a theory. And a theory doesn't remain a theory. It becomes a conclusive fact once it's tested against factual data, for which there is none. So that's the most important thing, I think, is that we need to find ways to educate the professionals about whether or not using attachment theory is appropriate or not. And there is just not, there's not enough data that would indicate whether it was. It'd be like saying, let's take the Pfizer vaccine and let's assume that the Pfizer vaccine works just because we've observed that it's working in people, not because we've taken blood tests, we've done it against another group of people that weren't taking the drug or a control group. So let's just observe. Well, testing doesn't work that way, and to use something that's so unfounded as attachment theory in the way that it's used within the department is horrific, and it should not happen. And we need to find ways to stand up against it. And one of the other problems I've come across just the other day, which I've been aware of for some time, is that the people who are defending parents in court, namely solicitors, they themselves, look, psychologists and social workers get it wrong on this subject. There's very little substantive arguments against attachment out there because it just seems to have been around for so long. Everybody's just made this assumption that for some reason attachment theory is the be-all and end-all of working out where a kid's going with their lives. And that's just untrue. It's just not true. The fact that there isn't evidence should be enough indications for all of us to say, well, maybe we need to hold back about attachment theory. But solicitors don't know anything about lots of things, regretfully, yet they're in there defending parents, and they should be finding ways to make a stand against some of these erroneous beliefs when it comes to this theory that's presented in court. And most judges do not understand. See, judges hear the psychologists and the social workers talking about attachment theory all the time. So for them, this has become a reality. This has become the standard, if you like, around removing a child. Yet it's a standard that's false. And it's time that we stood up and recognised its falsity. There is nothing that replaces it, unfortunately. There is nothing that says that when a child receives a certain type of attention or goes through a certain sort of trauma, that this is going to be the certain outcomes for these kids in years to come. Kids deal with trauma differently. We all deal with trauma differently. There's not one set standard for everything. But the way they've made attachment theory is that if this happens, then this will happen and all these subsequent things will follow. And it's false. It's just not true. So we need to find ways to challenge that. And we need to get out there and we need to talk about attachment theory in ways which makes people at least think about whether or not it has a valid space, or place rather, within the child protection system. Because it doesn't. And there's a whole host of different things that can cause a child's poor behaviour. And none of that has anything necessarily to do with attachment. Nothing at all, And it certainly could be from the traumas that the child has received while in care. No disputing any of that. That for many kids is the reasons why their behaviours are the way that they are, not because of attachment. And you could also argue that children's removal from the major caregiver in their life, namely the parent, is a reason for their bad behaviour. And kids are distressed and distraught because they're removed from a sibling, because they're separated from their home. There could be 101 different reasons why a child might act out when in care. None of those necessarily have to do with attachment. None at all. Not attachment anyway, as is defined by the department. The fact that they miss their parents, regardless of how crappy their parents may be significant. But the problem is that none of those facts ever get addressed. they're ignored because attachment theory takes over. So it's like the all-encompassing panacea for this problem. And the result of that is that a lot of kids are taken away when they shouldn't be, and that they're kept away from their parents because of a theory that is only a theory with no practical proof behind it whatsoever. And all of this started with a bloke by the name of Harlow, who had Reese monkeys, and he had a cage of. In one cage he had a monkey that was just a wire mesh. In the other cage he had a monkey that had fur over it. And the Reese monkeys, and the one with had wire on it, had a feeding tube of some description so that the monkeys could feed from it. The other one just had the mesh. From that, because the monkeys were more attracted to the cloth mesh of the other artificial monkey, they drew the conclusion that that was a closer attachment to that monkey simply because of the way it felt. My guess is the monkeys just felt more comfortable lying on this mesh than they did lying on a wire monkey that had food. But from these weird, nonsensical, scientific so-called experiments comes a set of beliefs which then in turn formulates these ideas about what it is that we should or should not do with children who are in care and why we should take them away in the first place. And as I said before, it is wrong. And if you've got any comments to make, please make them below. I'll be happy to respond to them and happy to hear from you as to what you may think about attachment theory and how it's impacted your life. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourself, and more importantly, be safe.